this is an aircraft that's a product of Japanese engineering technology, which was incredibly good. Very early on, the Japanese, when they began plotting to wipe out the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, they realized that sooner or later they were going to have some way of bombing Washington, D.C. And the plan that Yamamoto and others came up with was to build a giant submarine. The museum was the ending of the war in August 1945 saved his life, because he had been trained how to fly this airplane, because they had versions of this airplane that they could train the pilots with an airplane that had wheels so it could fly off of a runway. And he was assigned to one of the Aki-Saran aircraft that was placed on a submarine that was headed for a target in the Aleutian Island area where we were storing materials for the invasion of Japan. And his comment to the staff here at the museum was, the ending of the war probably saved his life, because he knew that while he could fly the airplane and that it could be launched from a catapult on the deck of the submarine, if the commander of the submarine didn't bother to put pontoons on it, there was no way he could ever land the airplane. And he knew the submarine commander would launch the 3 airplanes with bombs on them and then submerge and get the heck out of there. So his comment to us was, the ending of the war saved his life. Kind of an interesting look at a Japanese naval aviator's look at World War II. And it was this airplane that was originally designed to bomb Washington, D.C. There's another airplane that a lot of people don't know actually was used in World War II. This is a German aircraft called an Arado Blitz. A-R-A-D-O. Blitz was the name the Germans gave to it. It was an airplane that they actually had after we invaded Normandy to actually look as a reconnaissance aircraft and as a bomber aircraft. And one of the disadvantages it gave to the Allies after Normandy was that this airplane was so fast we couldn't keep up with it. It is a jet-powered aircraft that was used both as a bomber and as a reconnaissance aircraft. It had a crew of 1. That meant if it was being used as a reconnaissance aircraft, that meant it was taking pictures. The pilot actually had to slow down in order to operate the cameras, and that made it vulnerable to be caught from behind by Allied fighter aircraft. Well, the Germans realized that that was the one vulnerability that the Arado had, and so the pilot was always given one of these devices, which is a periscope that enabled him to always see what was coming up behind him. And if necessary, then he could apply the power of the rocket, of the jet engines, and get the heck out of here, and we couldn't catch it with any P-47 or P-38 or P-51. It had one other little problem though. Because it was a jet airplane, it would take enormous length of time for a jet engine in 1944 to build up enough power for the airplane to actually get off the runway. And that meant it was only stationed where there were long runways. And so when we knew there were Arado Blitzes being stationed at certain airfields in Germany, we not only bombed the hangars where they might be, or bombed the airplanes if we saw the airplanes, we bombed the runways. That meant they couldn't take off without a long runway. The Germans immediately came up with a solution to that. They put these devices on the airplane. It's a rocket engine. And when the pilot got in the airplane and started the jet engines, he could then start the rocket engines and get enough power to get off the runway without having to use the full runway length. And not only that, he would get airborne so quickly that the little parachute that's on the nose of the rocket engine would allow him to release the rocket engine, which would then float down to the ground before he ever left the airfield, and they could go out and grab it and fill it with rocket fuel and use it to get a second aircraft in the air. While it was able to exceed the speed of our fighter aircraft, the Germans had another little problem. Jet engines in 1944 were enormous consumers of fuel, and the Germans had a great shortage of fuel, and therefore it never became widely used in the war, but it was a fearsome weapon. But World War II produced lots of fearsome weapons. One of them was this airplane right here. This particular airplane is a bomber, a B-29 bomber. We built several thousand B-29 bombers in World War II. They were a long-range bomber. The genesis of the B-29 is we needed a bomber that might have to fly enormous distances, especially if Great Britain ever fell to the Germans. And that's when Boeing came up with the idea of building a bomber with maybe thousands of miles capability. When we realized that we were able to build an atomic bomb, however, the role of the B-29 became the airplane that could take an atomic bomb from some airfield somewhere in the Pacific and drop it on Japan. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the airplanes designed to carry an atomic bomb. This is an airplane that is called the Enola Gay, because, ladies and gentlemen, this is the airplane that dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, August 6, 1945. It's different than all the thousands of other B-29s that were built. If you study pictures of B-29s, most of the B-29 pictures you see show that it will have defensive weapons, machine guns in the nose, machine guns underneath, machine guns on the side, machine guns on the top. This one doesn't have any of those items. It has one lone gunner turret at the very tail, so you couldn't sneak up on it from behind. But machine guns and their apparatus was weight. And you can make the airplane fly longer distances on the same amount of fuel if you took a lot of the weight off. If you took the machine guns and the machine bullets off, the airplane weighed a lot less. In addition, when we put people in aircraft in World War II, we tried to protect them wherever they were by putting thickness of metal around wherever they were sitting. It's called armor plate. What it was just thickness of metal that would protect against machine gun bullets. The B-29 that you're looking at didn't have any protective armor plate in it. Boeing did not build this airplane. It's a Boeing B-29, but it was built by a company called Martin under contract with Boeing. It was built in Omaha, Nebraska. A special edition of the B-29s. There were only 15 of them built like this. Paul Tibbets, the commander of the group that were going to fly this, had to train his troops that were going to fly these airplanes a little differently than normal commanders. Because while Tibbets knew what he was going to fly and carry and drop, he was told he couldn't tell anybody else other than his deputy, Charles Sweeney. But he had to tell them there was a little problem. You were going to be carrying a bomb. And as you approach the target, you were going to let loose that bomb. And guess what? If you're flying like my hand and you drop something, it continues to go in the same direction you're flying. And he was told that the bomb was going to explode in the air. And it was going to explode in a fireball that might be 20,000 feet in diameter. Well, it didn't sound like a real good idea to fly your airplane, drop a bomb, have it explode, and have to fly into a fireball. So what Tibbets had to do, he took his flight crew out to a desert area in Utah and had to train them how to change the direction of this airplane. Well, airplanes can change direction by actually going into a dive to get up speed and then turning rapidly in another direction. And that's what you do with a P-47 or a P-38 or a P-51. But B-29 bombers weren't designed to do that. They were designed to turn gradually over a many-mile course. He had to figure out what was the maximum angle he could dive in to get the right amount of speed to make the quickest exit from wherever that fireball was going to occur.
What was that word?
And he had to do that without telling his flight crew why they were learning to do these weird maneuvers with a great big airplane. Well, on August 6, 1945, Paul Tibbets took this airplane, dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, and a lot of people thought the Japanese military would immediately sue for peace, but they didn't. And so 3 days later, Charles Sweeney, Paul Tibbets' deputy, got in another of the special-built B-29s called Boxcar, took off from Tinian Island in the Marianas and dropped the second bomb on Nagasaki. And the military went to the emperor and convinced the emperor to surrender on August 14th, I believe it was, 1945, and World War II ended on that day. You may want to come back and take a picture of the B-29. We've got it on a short platform, so the nose of it is up near this walkway here. The walkway goes all the way over to the food service and bookstore area of the museum, so if you're ever over there, you can come over on the walkway. But there are also stairways. Everywhere you see the checkered walls, there is both restrooms and stairways. Restrooms on each floor, stairway to go. The plane was taking off from Charles de Gaulle airfield in Paris. It ingested something into the engine and blew up. And that really raised doubts in people's minds. So it was not economically feasible to continue to fly. And when we opened this building in 2003, Air France decided to stop flying Concordes, and that's why we got their #1 Concorde. If you want to take a picture of the Concorde, I advise you to, where that big clock is down there, there's an elevator there that will take you up to this walkway. You can actually get a good picture of it on your iPhone or your camera from that. There's no other place in the building where you can get a good picture of the Concorde other than that elevated walkway up there. But then once you're up there, you can see the Boeing, the Enola, some of these other airplanes a lot better. So it's a good place to go. There is an elevator there, but there's also one back where this clock is, so that you can walk along and come back down. I have been talking for over an hour and a half. I promised some of you that I would only talk for an hour and a half.